is clearly directed by a Polish director, because at the same time that we have a very English-looking cinematography and a very English-looking mise-en-scène, there are a number of strange and paranoid elements that recall the psychological unwell-being that many Polish directors like to bring to cinema. Because what they often remind us is that while we're watching a story and we are immersed in suspended disbelief, we're also never quite sure of our own reality and the reality of the characters. And this is what we find in the moment that we enter the shout. We are given a bookending narrative within which the narrative occurs. So there's already a palimpsest of multiple realities happening, and then we are forced to confront our own relationship with reality. This means that when we are first introduced to Alan Bates' character, he himself says to a very young, very timid Tim Curry that he's going to tell a story that he is told often but never in the same order, and it never unfurls the same way. So while we have a personal character narrative, we know that nothing is trustworthy and that the reality of everything is always contingent on the perspective of the storyteller.
What I'm going to tell you is true. Only I'm telling it in a different way. It's always the same story.
In The Shout, Alan Bates is a terribly gruff and gruesome looking kind of hairy, masculine person juxtaposed against this extraordinarily weedy and quite pathetic John Hurt. And his fetishization of his time in Australia amongst the tribal Aboriginals, which is itself a fantasy because, of course, Indigenous Australians are very specific to their tribes, creates an other world within the head of both the viewer and the people listening to his narrative. That means that there is this other space, or this imaginative any space, and with that any space comes any rule, any law, and therefore any reality or any mode of truth. So even though the tales are being told around the domestic space of the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, we see both Susanna York and John Hurt being seduced into the possibility of the reality of something that is completely unreal, which is this notion of this evil, murderous shout as not being a myth, as not being something that only the primitive other, which is in itself a fantasy created in the white Western head, being incarnated.
Put your fingers to your ears when you want me to stop. Not before I begin.
The themes of belief and materiality are also underestimated perhaps in John Hurt's character, because he seems feeble and weak and inconsequential. However, in a way, he acts as a conduit through which our relationship with the materiality of film can be effectuated. His sound studio is surrounded by little posters of art, as we all have in our working spaces. And the primary ones we see are Francis Bacon and his tortured bodies, and some Edvard Munch as well. And those are both abstractions of the materiality of flesh in a way that John Hurt, his character, abstracts sound in order to create a reality. But at the same time, he seems to be looking and clutching onto something that is real and that is believable. So he makes Alan Bates prove the shout. And then he goes to church and he feels like he's pious and that he's doing something, but actually he's just there as a musician. He wants to have an affair with the raunchy cobbler's wife, and yet he can't even commit to that. He's got this sense that nothing is real enough or committed enough. And in a way, this is juxtaposed with the Alan Bates character, who believes in magic so much that it becomes real, and we stop questioning whether magic is empirical or not. All we are really faced with is the fact that the effects are real. And so there's one beautiful moment where Susanna York is about to make love with Alan Bates, and she finds herself on the floor in the exact position of the Francis Bacon postcard in John Hurt's studio. And it shows us that Alan Bates has made a reality, an actual lived experience of these fragile, abstracted ideas. And so whether he is mad, whether he believes in magic, his is an actual reality, whereas John Hurt's is an amorphic, affective abstraction that really doesn't lead to any kind of fulfillment for him, even though he is apparently the sane one that, of course, ends up in the insane asylum.